Hey everyone, today it's maintenance day on the Toyota Corolla. Today I'm going to be replacing the serpentine belt, which is basically the rubber belt on the front of the engine that turns things like the water pump, the alternator, the air conditioning compressor. It's something that needs to be done periodically because they are made out of rubber and they will start to crack and fray over time. They usually will not catastrophically fail. It usually takes quite a bit of mileage or time on them for that to happen. If it does, it usually won't damage anything, but the car will become disabled within a matter of a few minutes. The alternator won't be generating electricity. The water pump will be circulating water, so the engine will start to overheat. So if this does break when you're driving, you will become stranded, so it's something you want to do periodically. Usually you want to look for any sort of cracks on the ribs on the inside. That's usually what starts to fray first. Unfortunately, Toyota does not have any sort of recommendation in the maintenance guide or the owner's manual. When I went through it, I didn't see anything. They also don't have any sort of routing guide on here. Typically, they would have a routing guide on here or somewhere on the engine, on the front cowling here, or underneath the hood, they would have a routing guide to show where everything goes. They don't have that either, so when I get into the car, I'll show you. You really need to, if you're not comfortable, you've never done a belt before, you might just want to take a picture with your phone. I usually try to stick to OEM parts when I'm doing maintenance on my vehicles. With something like this, I think it's okay to go with one of the good aftermarket companies. This is a Dayco. Gates is also another very good company. They both make very good belts. These are considerably cheaper. The Toyota genuine replacement belt for this car was about $60 online. This I got for $12 on Amazon. And like I said, Dayco or Gates are both very good belt companies that have been around for a long time. I think make just as good as quality of a product as the Toyota OEM belts. So just another logistical thing, the LE Ecos with the Valvematic engine take a different belt than the S, the SE, the LE, or the L model. So any of the Toyotas with the Valvematic engine take a slightly different belt than the other one. So you just definitely want to double check the numbers just to make sure you get the correct one. Before I do any maintenance on the car, take that plastic thing off the engine. They're very easy to take off. They just basically sit on these little studs here, and they're usually always in the way when you try to do something. So just pop them off, get it out of the way. They're kind of annoying. All right. Like I said, when you're going to go get started, if you've never done a belt before, you're not 100% comfortable, take a picture of this before you get started. An easy reference, aside from taking a picture also, is always to remember that the smooth part of the belt will always go up against a smooth part of the pulley, and the grooved part of the belt will always go up against a grooved pulley. So you'll never have, example down here is this pulley right here is smooth. You will never have the grooves of the belt go face down against those, and it's vice versa as well. So grooves always go into grooves, and smooth always runs on smooth. So that's kind of an easy way to remember if you've never done this before, you're not 100% comfortable. But like I said, it's a little bit harder with these sideways or transversely mounted engines to get in here, but try to take some pictures for a reference if you're a little uncomfortable with this or you're not 100% sure. You only really need one tool to do this. It's actually a relatively simple change. Now, these newer 2014 and newer Corollas have an automatic tensioner. The way you can tell if it's an automatic tensioner is it has that spring down there that sets the tension. Some of the older Toyota Corollas, they would have a set screw here on the alternator, and you would have to manually tighten or loosen that screw to set the tension. The problem with that is it's very easy to either have the belt too loose or too tight. If you have it too loose, it can come off, it can shred the belt. If you have it too tight, you can put too much stress on the bearings of all the various pulleys and you can prematurely wear them out. So I think having the automatic tensioner is a little bit more obviously complex because it has a spring on it, but I think it's just an easier thing to go with. You don't have to worry about setting the tension. It always keeps it at the correct tension, so it's always right, and you never have to worry that you're doing the tension wrong on that. So like I said, the only tool you really need is a 14 millimeter. Either you need a ratchet or a wrench. Now down here, this lower stud here, it looks like a bolt. It's 14, like I said, it's 14 millimeter. What that does is that will move the tensioner back. So basically, you want to have preferably a longer wrench. If you have like a breaker bar that can fit in there, or a really long 14 millimeter wrench. This job, it's a little bit easier. You can do it by yourself, but if you have someone there to assist you, it makes the job a little bit easier. So you can have one person take the tension off the belt, and while the other person usually, whatever pulley's the highest, it's the easiest to get off when the belt is loose. Just basically pop it off this alternator pulley, and then you can fish it off from there. So like I said, you can do it by yourself, but if you have a buddy or somebody available just to take all the tension off while the other person takes the belt off one of the pulleys, that's kind of the easiest way to do it. One thing you should never do that I have seen a ton of people do when they change the belts on these engines: don't cut the belt. There's a bunch of things that are going to happen if you cut the belt. First and foremost, this thing is sitting under tension right now because it's held in place with a spring. When you cut that, the tensioner is going to slam back really hard. You run the risk of hurting yourself and damaging the tensioner if you do that. Also, if you get the belt off and you go to put the new one on, and you find out that the new one is wrong, it's either too wide, too long, too short, whatever it may be, now you're stranded because you can't run the car without a belt on it, and you got to either have somebody pick up another belt, you got to use somebody else's vehicle, whatever it may be, but now you can't use the car. And you always want to, when you take the old belt off, before you throw it out or destroy it or whatever you're going to do, you want to put it up to the new belt to make sure they're the same length. They will usually not stretch. If they stretch, it's a very, very minute amount, so they should both be the exact same length. So you want to check that when you get this belt off. Check the old one against the new one to make sure it is correct, and then go from there. So I'll get everything set up now. I'll grab a wrench, and we will start taking this off. All right, so I got my long handle 14 millimeter ratchet. I'm going to turn it clockwise, and as I do, the spring is going to start to decompress, and it's going to put just enough slack in the belt to allow me to get it off of this alternator pulley. So I'm going to work it off, and then once it's all the way off, I can slowly back off and allow the tensioner to go back to its original position. I'll actually sit back a little further because it'll have no tension on it. So I'll slide this off. This is the time where having a second person makes this job easier, because it's a little bit trickier to do this with one person, but it's coming off. When I get it off all the way, I'm going to slip it all past the various pulleys, and I'm going to check the length of it against the original, the new belt rather. All right, I got the old belt off. Here's the new one. First thing I'm going to do, put these up to each other like this. You can see they're both the same width. They're both 6-rib belts. You also want to take them and stretch them out the same length to make sure they're the same length to each other. So go ahead and put them next to each other. Stretch them out all the way so they're straight. I did this before, and they are both the exact same length. So we know this new belt is going to be correct. So some people will say it's a good idea to change the automatic tensioner while you have this off. That's up to you. I'll usually spin everything, make sure all the bearings are sounding okay and everything, no odd noises. If everything sounds good, then I'll just put the belt back on and not change anything else. So it's basically going to be the reverse procedure. You just have to fish it. Like I said before, if you're uncomfortable or have never done a belt before, like on the alternate here, this is groove. Grooves always face down to grooves. So this is going to go like that. You will never, ever, ever have a belt where, let's say, like the smooth part will go up against grooves like that. That will never, ever be like that. And the vice versa. Below with the water pump pulley is smooth, which means this smooth part will go up against it. So always the ribbed against the ribbed and the smooth against the smooth. So I'll go ahead and I'll put this thing back on now. All right, I got the new belt on. It ended up being a little bit easier rather than jumping it off the alternator on the top. Below it is the water pump, and that's smooth, so it slips off a little bit easier than doing it off the alternator. I found that worked better. Now, the new belt is on. Now, before you start the engine, you need to make absolutely sure that every single pulley has the belt sitting on it correctly. So you need to literally check every individual one to make sure that it's routed correctly, so you have, groover to groove and smoother to smooth, and that it's even. Because if it's riding up on an edge and you go to start it, it could shred the belt. So every individual pulley needs to get checked. So, okay, so the alternator looks good, the water pump looks good, the AC compressor, it looks even, and then you have the crank all the way down the bottom. So the crank pulley, let me see, there we go. That looks good too. So initially, if one of them is off a hair, the grooved ones are especially important to make sure you get those straight. If the smooth ones are off a hair, they'll just self-level out once you start the engine, but you want to do your best to make sure that everything is already straight. This on the bottoms where you can't physically see, you might want to stick your hand under there just to double check to make sure everything's good. But like I said, you want to make absolutely sure that they're as close to being centered as reasonably possible, especially the rib ones, before you start the engine. When you start, make sure no one's standing near it in case something happens and the belt breaks, so they don't get hit by the belt. But that's basically a routing. I did this by myself. Would have been a little bit easier with a second person, but I still was able to do it. But overall, not a hard job. Something that you can definitely do yourself and save yourself a few $100 by doing this yourself instead of having a mechanic do it. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.